Hey y'all! With Season 4 of New World just days away, I wanted to share another brief update on my spear-centric solo build. This is the build and playstyle I've been using to solo a few M3 expeditions, including all of Barnacles and Black Powder, all of Starstone Barrows, all but Scylla and Lazarus, and the first third of the Ennead. I don't want to make this a complete rehash of my Season 3 Spear video, so I do apologize for the retread, and I'll try and recap the basics without going into too much detail. This is my mastery, and I stick to this build for just about everything I do, running Cyclone, Skewer, and Perforate, with 150 Strength, 350 Dexterity, and 100 Constitution. Spear already has a few sources of active stamina regen through its mastery, which lets me dodge pretty constantly, and if I desperately wanted some CC in my kit, I could always take Sweep instead of Skewer, but so far I haven't felt the need. The biggest change I've made from my previous setup is I don't run Vault Kick anymore, since the cooldown reduction from continuous motion hasn't felt necessary with 4 stacks of Refreshing already on my gear. Moreover, Cyclone has Grit, which combined with the stamina from Invigorating combo and the self-healing from its perk, makes it a solid substitute for a dodge in a lot of places. And it does a ton of damage where Vault Kick just didn't, so that's a huge upgrade. I still run Void Darkplate and Blood Drinker as my artifact armor and jewelry, and my favorite Heartrune for all situations is still Brutal Stoneform. This playstyle centers on maintaining Fortify from Fortifying Perforate, a spear perk that gives up to 75% increased armor if it's on a weapon as opposed to armor. Unlike Enfeebling Skewer, which suffers from debuff resilience against bosses in M2 or higher, Fortifying Perforate mitigates a ton of damage, especially in a heavy equip load where it has the most effect. I like to maintain 3 or 4 stacks of Refreshing across my gear set, which if combined with other sources of cooldown reduction, such as Aggressive Maneuvers and Refreshing Jabs, makes Perforate so frequently available that I can stay constantly fortified. And on top of this, I try and keep at least 4 stacks of Enchanted Ward for even further mitigation, since I can't always dodge everything. When it comes to self-healing, I rely on a handful of sources. The Artifact Ring Blood Drinker does most of the heavy lifting with Ghoul's Harmony and Leeching, but I also run Lifestealing on my spear and the Leeching Cyclone perk on a piece of armor, which makes Cyclone a massive self-heal even against a single target. The biggest drawback of this build is that the Fortify from this perk falls off instantly if I swap weapons, so swapping weapons even for a moment can get me into big trouble. A better player could definitely make it work, but I've killed myself so many times trying to squeeze in a rain of arrows or poison shot between hits, so I like to keep things simple and just stick with the spear for most fights. Besides, with all this cooldown reduction, I'm usually only a couple light attacks or a single dodge away from refreshing my abilities again, so the opportunity cost is pretty small. That being said, I usually run a bow as my secondary for pulling and squeezing in some abilities where I can, but on certain encounters where I want more defensiveness, I'll run a flail and a tower shield as my secondary. Even if I never swap to them during combat, Reinforced Vitality gives me a passive health increase on top of extra armor from the shield, and if I do find the opportunity, I can quickly cast Warding Bludgeon or Arcane Smite, or both, for additional Fortify that persists through swaps, even if neither ability strikes a target. This is great for fights like the last boss in Forge, where he's constantly moving out of melee range. That way I'm fortified when he does come back, since he comes back swinging, at least until I can hit my next Perforate. I've spent my flail points in a way that I can swap in minor utility like slows and knockdowns as needed, but Bludgeon and Smite are the only 2 that I keep active at all times. Other perks that make this build even more forgiving and sustainable are Stamina Recovery and Refreshing Recovery on an amulet, plus Regenerating and Fortifying Toast on an earring. Call these overkill if you want, but all this redundancy is what keeps me alive through all my mistakes. In open world content, or whenever I'm killing frequently enough to proc it, Mortal Fortification is actually a pretty nice perk. It's great for farming big groups of elites, but it's definitely more of a niche perk. Next, I want to quickly cover some of the new artifacts, at least the ones that I'm interested in as a solo player. Last update, I talked about pairing a lightning-converted spear with the artifact Warhammer Mjolnir for more spear damage through lightning, but with Boltcaster on its way in Season 4, that lightning set is looking especially appealing, enough that I'll probably make a second set with lightning harnessing instead of health, Electrified Topaz Runeglass for my spear, and Electrified Onyx in all 5 armor slots. There's also Vengeance if I really wanted to make a spear and lifestaff build, assuming the 20% damage buff continues to persist through weapon swaps when it goes live. Ticks of Sacred Ground would keep the damage buff applied, plus Holy Ground and Anointed would increase self-healing by a bit. Not to mention we'd be able to clear our own debuffs with Splash of Light through Purify, which could be useful. And finally, there's the Quick Draw Gloves that provide temporary immunity after a weapon swap. This could be perfect for very specific situations, but it's not something I'm desperate for and not something I'm looking to plan around. So I'll leave it at that. And that's everything as far as new information goes. As I mentioned before, the reason I enjoy this playstyle is because it's refreshingly simple, tremendously forgiving, and both solo and casual friendly. My damage might not impress anyone, but I don't mind if it takes me 1 to 3 hours to solo a mutated expedition, or 20 minutes to kill a single boss. The whole reason I like running these things solo is because there's no rush, no pressure, no any sort of accountability, which is nice because I'm mostly doing them for mounts and skins. Plus, all this keeps me interested until they give us some proper solo content, which I really hope they do. For a closer look at my general playstyle, a few gearing recommendations, and a more detailed breakdown of important nodes on the Spear Mastery Tree, I'll leave a link in the description to the video I made at the start of Season 3. There are a few key differences, such as the fact that I now prefer Cyclone over Vault Kick, Keen as my third Spear perk, and Keen Awareness instead of Thrust damage as the final perk on Blood Drinker. Otherwise, I don't think many of my recommendations have changed. As always, if there's anything I've left out or explained poorly, feel free to leave me a question below and I'll try and answer it to the best of my ability. Until next time, thanks so much for watching, and have a good one.